So hi everyone, and welcome to our second installment of the Tuesday Schmooze. My name is Max Babus, and I am the Leadership and Development Coordinator for AUJS. And I'll be interviewing our guest here today, Rabbi Steve Wernick. Reb Steve is a senior rabbi at Beth Tzedek Congregation, a conservative synagogue in Toronto with over 4,000 members. He's been named one of Newsweek's 50 most influential rabbis in America and was on the Forward's list of influential Jewish leaders. He's also served as the CEO of the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism and launched efforts to help the community reach out to people with disabilities, members of the LGBTQI+ community, and interfaith households. He was also instrumental in efforts to create a permanent space for pluralistic and egalitarian prayer at the Western Wall. Personally, it's great to have Reb Steve here on the Tuesday Schmooze. I met him earlier this year in Toronto as part of AUJS's Leadership and Development Program. And I found our conversation there really inspiring. So welcome. And to start us off, if you could introduce yourself and tell us about your favorite Jewish food.
My favorite Jewish food, I would have to say, is shawarma. I love shawarma in Laffa, and I have a couple favorite shawarma places, one in Jerusalem and one in Beersheba, that I like to visit in order to get my fix.
And I also appreciate it if you could say a little bit about Canada's Jewish community.
So Canada has a wonderful Jewish community. I think it's one of the more unique Jewish communities in the world. In some ways, it's very similar to that of Australia. We are about 400,000 Jews. The big influx to Canada came after World War II, where almost half of the population suddenly arrived, and their descendants, obviously. Canada's Jewish community tends to be more conservative with a small c. The conservative movement is the largest denomination in Canada, followed by just Jewish, no religion, followed by Orthodox, followed by Reform. So everything in Canada skews more traditional, I think, as a result of that. We have a lot in Toronto, we have a lot of day schools, we have Jewish kosher restaurants, music festivals, film festivals. It's really a thriving Jewish community, very extraordinary. Lots of learning and lots of engagement. And because Canada, people don't really leave Canada all that much. And if you're moving to one of the bigger cities, you're usually moving to Toronto, not away from it. So Toronto there's a lot of stability and a lot of third and fourth generation families that are here. Beth Tzedek is the largest synagogue in Canada. It was established in 1955 as an amalgamation between two other Orthodox synagogues that were joining together to become conservative and to pool their resources. We have 2,300 households and close to 6,000 people that are members of our community. We have, at this moment, I think, the largest cohort of millennials that belong to any synagogue in the world, with almost 1,100 households, or 44% of the congregation that are under 40 years old. It's a vibrant, thriving place. Our members are leaders not only of the Jewish community, but of the larger Canadian community and worldwide as well. So it's really a fun place to be.
To hear. So you've had a fairly impressive career, maybe not fairly impressive, but a very impressive career leading religious organizations in the Jewish community, obviously now in your role as Beth Tzedek. And I guess what made you interested in both spiritual leadership and leadership in general?
Well, my father's a rabbi, and I did a genealogical project during COVID. I was blessed that my mother, Alea Shalom, discovered in 1960 on her first trip to Israel that she had a relationship to Yitzhak Ben Tzvi, who was the second president of Israel. And she reached out to him and had the opportunity to meet him. And he gave her a family history that his father had created, which is Dafka, it's a history. And so during COVID, I had the history and all of the genealogical trees translated. And I can trace, on my mother's side, I can trace my family back to my 16th great grandfather. And the only reason I can do that is because all the men in that side of the family were rabbis. So I think one answer to your question, Max, is it's in my genes, in my DNA. I didn't really have a choice, unbeknownst to me. Um, but in truth, when I think about that, I think there's a couple influences on my desire to go into the rabbinate, not least of which is being the son of a rabbi and a Jewish educator, and growing up in a very beautiful Jewish home. Um, Even more important than my parents and the home I was raised in, I would say, are my experiences in USY and Camp Ramah, Jewish youth movements, and Jewish camping. And even more so than as a kid in those activities, being a staff member, I think really influenced me, where I realized that I had a knack for this and that I really enjoyed it. And then the third influence is my my natural mother, who I mentioned, who went to Israel in 1960, she passed when I was a child. And my father remarried, and she passed 10 years after that. So there was some trauma in my life. And as a result of that trauma, there were members of the Jewish community. I was living in Minneapolis, Minnesota at the time, who took Jewish values seriously and made sure that I, as a young man experiencing trauma, didn't get lost. And what I learned from that experience was that that people who take Jewish values seriously and live their lives by them really do make a difference in the lives of other people. And so in some way, um, everything I do is paying that forward. So I would say those are the three most important experiences that led me to the rabbinate. What led me to leadership is, I don't know, part of it is probably ego. It's like, I always like to be honest with ego. You can't be a leader of a community and not have some sense that being in front of people is fun and that you have something important to say. But I guess, I don't know, I've always been that person who's um, been able to be the, captain of the basketball team and um, uh, one who, like, when nobody can figure out what should we do tonight, what we should do tonight, I'm the one who says, oh, let's do this. And so I've always, I guess, I had an instinct for leadership, and I've been blessed to have wonderful role models and mentors along the way that have helped me refine that, so that I find myself here talking to you about leadership.
So on that, you mentioned you had a bit of a knack for um, this kind of thing when you were working in Jewish youth movements as a staff member. So I'm interested in what are some leadership skills that you found beneficial, um, and those that you think that are relevant to Jewish university student leaders who might work in like roles both in the Jewish community or maybe outside of it.
So I think a very important element of leadership is listening and curiosity. So my leadership style is I ask a lot of questions to really try to understand um, where people are at, what they're concerned about, what their fears are, and how and what it is that they're looking for. Um, so that's one that's very important. I think as a rabbi, a key element of Jewish leadership is authenticity, meaning that I'm constantly studying Torah and I'm constantly learning. And the ability to learn uh, is what helps me translate that learning into ways in which I can be really what the Hebrew is the Hebrew calls rabbinic leaders, religious leaders, clay kodesh. We're vessels of holiness, and so I try to live my life as that vessel. And what that means is that I have to be able to put into my kli uh, Torah so that I can pour it out in terms of filling other people's kli with that Torah. So I think that's really important, is listening, learning, and curiosity. I also think courage, especially today, in this environment, I think courage is a very important element of leadership. I don't believe in market Judaism. I do believe in marketing Judaism. Um, and I think being able to uh, take clear moral stands are important. Uh, I also don't believe in, uh, as a learner, what I think today might not be what I think tomorrow. So I have very few absolutes in my life, um, and I'm always testing them to make sure that those are really the things that I want to stand by. So I would say that those for me, those are the four key ingredients: listening, learning, curiosity, and clarity, courage.
Mhm. So we've talked a bit about Jewish values, spoke about how they were a big influence, and this kind of discussion we've just had touched on a few of them. Um, so how do you kind of serve as an ambassador to other, maybe other congregations, to other communities in Toronto? Um, and how might you like bring forth these values in the conversations you have? And I guess how might you recommend that Jewish students might do the same?
Well, so one of the things that I've learned, and I think I shared with you and your peers when you were visiting here, is that people that are doing interesting things love to talk about the things that they're doing.
Hmm.
And I think I shared uh, the story of when I was at United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism. I was trying to figure out what's the business model. And I cold called a professor of business a friend of mine who worked at the University of Pennsylvania, suggested that I reach out to him to ask that question. And he helped me understand that the business model that I was looking for was something similar to Mary Kay or Avon Cosmetics, which is a peer-to-peer delivery model. And so I called up Avon, which was around the corner from where my offices were, and told him what I was thinking of doing. And can I come over and learn more about how you do your business? And the chief financial officer was a Jewish person and said yes. So that was kind of amazing. Um, and so like, I still to this day, when I learn of people doing interesting things and I want to find out more, I send them an email, I pick up the phone, I try to track them down, and 9 out of 10 times they're happy to talk on the phone. So for me, like it's the same thing. It's like, you asked me, for example, to come be part of this conversation. I'm happy to do it. And by building that network, meeting interesting people and being in those circles, just sharing my own ideas and listening to others and learning from them, you do that. And so that's, and then you get involved in things, right? It's the old adage, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. So I'm involved not only, my primary responsibility is to lead, a synagogue that's as big as a city, but I'm also involved in the Toronto Board of Rabbis and the Rabbinical Assembly of Ontario. I'm on the Rabbinic Advisory Board for Hillel, Ontario. I'm on the Board of Governors of the Jewish Agency in Israel. I'm a delegate to the WZO, to the World Zionist Organization, and so forth. So I participate in the things that I think are important, that are of value to me, and I carve out the time to make it happen. And I'll only be in places where uh, there's that free flowing um, opportunity to share ideas. Um, and by participating in that, people hear from me and I hear from them, and whatever sticks, sticks. And the people that want to continue the conversation offline, like you and I are doing now, we find a way to find each other and to do that. Here we are. I'm in Canada, you're in Australia.
Mhm.
And that conversation that we had from couple months ago is ongoing.
Mhm.
And that's how it happens. Um, what I say to people, even to my own kids, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And so I always ask.
Mhm. All right. So we've talked a bit about the kind of external view, you representing like Best Tzedek to other organizations or to um, other communities. I'm also interested to learn about how you maintain relationships inside your congregation and then with some of your peers at Best Tzedek as well.
So I'll start with the peers.
Mhm.
We have our spiritual leadership team meets every other Monday. One of those meetings is designated as a reporting agenda, in which we just what are the things that everybody needs to know about. And one of those meetings is a discussion agenda, which gives us the opportunity to think strategically about what's happening in the future and to do a little bit of a brainstorming and iteration of new ideas together. So that happens twice a month. There's a monthly meeting of senior management. There's the executive director and I meet weekly, and then the president, the chair of the board, the executive director, and I meet every other week. And then on top of that, there's an executive committee meeting, and then there's the board of directors meeting. So those are the set meetings that are designed to maintain those relationships. And every meeting that we have begins with a relational question. So you asked me what's my favorite Jewish food. That's a relational question,
Mhm.
right? Because by asking that, you now know something about me,
Mhm.
right? You know that I like Israeli food, that I like, and that I have at least two places in Israel that I like to go for that, right? So every meeting starts with that, and that's how you build relationships. In addition, for the team that I supervise, uh, I have regular check-ins based on people's goals to make sure that we're um, executing at the level that we want to execute, and that if we're not, to try to understand why that is the case. Do we need to adjust the goals? Do we need to find more resources? Do we need to take away roadblocks? So I have those meetings on a regular basis. And then I'm also a big believer in a concept of management called radical candor by Kim Scott, which is that especially when things are not going well, you talk about it right away. You don't wait. So I'm constantly talking to my team, providing feedback, soliciting feedback, because sometimes I'm the problem, right? So I want my team to tell me when I'm in the way, and so forth. In terms of the congregation, there never seems to be enough time for that. We're a big community, as I said. But we use a client relationship management system, a CRM system, in order to track the significant encounters that we're having.
Mhm.
We measure our pastoral care, our relational building, governance, and fundraising activities. And so everything goes into the CRM. And if something requires a follow-up, then I'll tag it for myself for follow-up in 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months, whatever it is. And if something requires a follow-up for somebody else, I'll tag that person for it. So for example, if I go to a Shiva Minyan, and at that Shiva Minyan, there are a lot of grandchildren, let's say, and they're in their 20s and 30s, I will tag one of our engagement staff members for 20s and 30s to reach out to those people to maybe pay a Shiva call. If I remember something of a conversation, is like I talked to Max about shawarma in Israel, I'll put that in there, and then they'll follow up. So we try to be very systematic from an operational level on managing the relationships, but there's so many of them, we're always behind the eight ball.
Mhm.
And I just accept that there are going to be moments when I'm going to drop that ball and I'm going to have to apologize for not meeting people's expectations, um, which is which is challenging because you want to meet everybody's expectations. But when you're trying to build a relational model with 5,000 people,
Mhm.
it's very hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, like from my experience leading AUJS in ACT as I did last year. It's just even managing it with 45 people was, um, you know, but I'd imagine they kind of scale up, scale down as much as you go, and you'd adjust kind of whatever you're working with to meet that. Like, I probably wouldn't need a full-blown CRM or a customer relationship management system to do what we have here, maybe here on a bit of a smaller level in Australia. But you might,
Yeah, but I mean, you could use, I mean, Google has a free one that you could use, right? I mean, it's just helpful in terms of organizing and maintaining data in a particular place.
hmm.
Um, and it's also, I think, what I try to do is um, create the expectation I'm trying to meet is not necessarily that Steve Wernick is reaching out to people, but has Beth Sedek reached out to people. So there are people that I'm like, I'm just somebody else is going to be responsible for that relationship. And maybe I might come in and out as the senior rabbi at key moments and opportunity, but somebody else is going to be responsible for that. And what we're going to start experimenting with beginning next month is a system, especially for the millennial population, is where um, specific families are assigned either a professional or a layperson who is responsible for that relationship. And the goal is to have 3 to 4 relational encounters over the course of the year, and a feedback loop so that what we learn from that can help guide the development of program and other engagement opportunities.
So I guess, obviously there's been, unfortunately, a huge uptick in anti-Semitism since October 7th. Um, and I'm just interested how you manage to deal with your own personal feelings and also be able to serve as a leader in the Jewish community. I found personally this was something that was very difficult for me. Um, and I feel like the people and some of my August friends in Australia, um, and some of the people in the Jewish community might benefit from this a bit broadly as well.
Yeah, so personally, I struggle with the sense that the level of anti-Semitism that we're addressing now and its relationship to anti-Zionism and anti-Israel behavior, um, it's so unlogical or so illogical to me. I can't rationally understand it. And so there's a big element of it's unbelievable, and yet it is, right? So I like, I try to hold, it's so unbelievable. It's like, how can people really think this? And yet they do, and they're acting on it. And it's so overwhelming that what I struggle with is this sense that it feels like a tsunami. And the problem with tsunamis is you can't stop them. You can only get to higher ground and hope that when it hits land, it doesn't cause that much damage and destruction, or enough people got out of the way that they'll survive it. And so where I struggle with is that there's so much going on. I don't know where the leverage points are. Like, you can't fight all of it all at once. Where are the most important places to focus your attention to try to have the maximum impact on a maximum impact that still seems like it's a minimum impact considering the size of the wave that's coming at us. And so I struggle with that. And there are a lot of times when I feel helpless um, and depressed about it. Um, so that's the struggle with it. As a leader, I don't think I'm all that different than other people. So I talk about my feelings, and I think that in talking about my feelings, I give others a language to perhaps frame the way in which that they're feeling. But I remind people that we've been here before, and we know how to deal with this, and we have to deal with this, and that there are allies, and we have to focus on our allies and build more of them. And also, that one of the key differences today is that there is a state of Israel, And the state of Israel, the state has become the international Jew, right? So people are trying to, I think, mask their anti-Semitism and being anti-Israel because no one wants to be an anti-Semite. But I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm just against Israel and don't think that Israel should have a right to exist. But it's like, so, but we have Israel, and the massacre that occurred on October 7th will not go unanswered. It has not gone unanswered. There are all sorts of legitimate questions about, how do you prosecute a just war in just ways? Is Israel doing enough to minimize civilian loss and take care of that? Humanitarian aid and so forth. Those are all legitimate questions. But the claim of genocide or apartheid or so forth, they're silly. And the words lose their meaning because they're bantied around so much. Genocide, proportionality, for example, is a legal term. It has a legal definition. And most people that use it have no idea what it means because the press puts out 300 Israelis killed, or now I guess 1,600 Israelis killed, 31,000 Palestinians, without any differentiation between combatants and non-combatants. So it's like, proportionality has lost its meaning because it gets presented in a way that is manipulative. So I try to remind people of the facts. I try to bring to our community thoughtful perspectives on what I and my community would consider legitimate elements of dialogue. Right. So if you delegitimize Israel, if you don't, I can't bring someone like that in because there's nothing to talk about. But if you want to talk about policies, you want to talk about Bibi Netanyahu, you want to talk about humanitarian aid, you want to talk about Palestinians, you want to talk about the future for tomorrow that includes an Israel in peace and a Palestinian national identity living in peace. Beseder, let's have those conversations, as difficult as they're going to be. But that's what I try to do. And I know I'm doing a good job because, everybody is upset with me. So
Everyone's upset with you as in like who's upset with you, right?
No, I mean it's like there's an old saying, the job of the rabbi is to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable, and I do that part really, really well. I mean, we brought in Yossi Katz recently. He's a former aide to Naftali Bennett when Naftali Bennett was the diaspora minister and the former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. He tends to be more right of center when it comes to Israel. So the leftists, were saying there's no place for my voice in this because, that's what the synagogue is. Well, tomorrow, Thursday, we're bringing Mohammed Dorashi, who's a fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute, who's a leader of the shared society movement within Israel, a Palestinian Israeli. And this morning, somebody asked me, why are you calling him Palestinian Israeli as opposed to an Arab Israeli? And I explained that for the last 15 years, many, if not all of the Israeli Palestinian Arab community are self-identifying as Palestinian Israeli because they want to connect with the national aspirations of their people, and they connect with Israel and want to remain Israeli citizens. They don't want to go to a Palestinian state, but that's how they self-identify. And so, I have people that are upset that we're bringing in Mohammed and that I'm referring to Mohammed as Palestinian Israeli. And I have people that are upset that I brought in Yossi Katz, who would refer to them as Israeli Arabs. So it's like, but that's, what I say to people is that, this is where we live and we need to you know, we need to model civil discourse about the most difficult conversations, and that's what I strive to do. It's not easy, especially not today.
On that bit about civil discourse, um, I think to me that really speaks to the idea that there are, there's like always like multiple sides to the story, right? And I found as someone who studies, like I'm a social science student, so the idea of like multiple realities in terms of um, like what that means with regards to my conceptualization of the world is definitely not yours, but there's somehow um, like there's somehow a bit of a bridge that needs to be built between that. Um, when you see, do you see yourself kind of building a bridge between people with regards to discourse, or is it about just um, I get Naftali Bennett's advisor on the one hand, and the other more left-wing person on the other hand?
So it's very hard. It's very, very hard right now to build bridges. Um, there was an active interfaith um, group groups plural in Toronto prior to October 7th. Um, and they've all fallen apart. Right? People have been meeting for years, well before I got to this community. And you know, we had one conversation in the Jewish community with the Muslim community a couple of weeks after October 7th, and we haven't been able to get together again. And it's truthfully not because of the Jews not wanting to do it, it's the Muslims won't sit with us. Um, the Christian communities, except for two of my Christian colleagues, I haven't heard from anybody. And one of them, he and I are working hard to try to bring our communities together and to bridge those communities. And we did an interfaith service together, and a part of that interfaith service was a relational question where we asked people to turn to their neighbors and to talk about something, and they did. And two women, one from his church and one from my shul, started meeting afterwards. And a couple of weeks ago, they invited us to a program to continue the conversation on anti-Semitism. They had 90 women from their peer groups that were there.
Wow.
So that was bridge building. But that's the only one, right? Right? So it's really, really hard at this moment, and it's difficult to build bridges um, with those that are accusing you of genocide.
Mm.
Um, so it's very, very hard. I do believe that part of the task is to try to build bridges, but you can't build bridges if you can't even model for yourself civil discourse, right? How can you speak civilly with another religious faith community if you can't speak civilly even amongst your own people? And so I think that's part of it, and also part of it is to help people have information because so many people get their information from unreliable sources. The number one place that anyone who's 25 to 35 gets their information from today is TikTok. And that's not a reliable source. And so that makes it challenging.
If you're interested in meeting people like Reb Steve, um, AUJS runs every year our leadership and development program. I went on it in January this year. I personally found it really, really valuable for me. So thank you very much for Reb Steve for sharing all of your wisdom and all of your experience with us. We've been talking a lot about relational questions, so I thought I might end with one as well. And that's if you could please tell AUJS your favorite Chag or Jewish holiday for us, and why.
My favorite Chag is actually Pesach, but I think I'm going to talk instead about Purim because it's around the corner. Because my favorite verse of the Tanakh is found in Megillat Esther. And that is when Mordechai confronts Esther and says, you have to go to the king and tell him what's happening because only you can stop this from happening. And he says to her, he says, don't think that if you remain silent at this moment, that you and your family are going to survive this, because you won't. Um, clearly, because just because you think you're in bed with the king doesn't mean that you're going to survive this. What happens to the Jews is going to happen to you as well. That's what that means. And then he says to her, Umi Yodea im la'et kazot higat lemachut. And who knows? Maybe this is the reason why you are queen, right? That you are where you are at this moment. And you're here for this moment to speak to the king and to save your people. We never know when that moment is going to be. And what I read about that is that every moment has the potential to really be transformative. And so if we live our lives as if every moment has that power, imagine the good that we could bring to the world. And so I certainly, it relates, Max, to what you said about like the influences on me being a leader. Part of paying it forward of the kindness that I experienced as a young person is I try to live my life umiodea, and who knows, im le'et kazot higat la rabbanut. Right? Who knows? Maybe this is the moment. This is the reason my conversation with you and whoever's going to be listening to this, there's some impact here. That's the reason that I've been blessed to be a rabbi at this moment in this place. So thanks.